Rachel D. Wilson, and I'm the Senior Associate Global Portfolio Manager at Echoing Green. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work, we are a social innovation fund, and we're leading the source for finding social innovators and proximate leaders in spaces with the boldest ideas for change. We find them as early as possible, so we focus on startups. And we fund them, support them, and connect them through a lifetime of social impact. And I think Kareem could tell us a little bit more about his experience later. For more than 30 years, we've been in this space, and Echoing Green has been on the front lines of solving the world's biggest problems, raising up transformational leaders and leaders who are willing to speak their truth to power and change the status quo. We find emerging leaders with the best ideas for social innovation as early as possible and set them on a path to lifelong impact. Our community of almost 1,000 social innovators includes past fellows such as First Lady Michelle Obama, the founders of organizations like Teach for America, the 1 Acre Fund, and major public figures such as Van Jones. So we've built this movement and refined it over the last 30 years, and our process discovers tomorrow's leaders today. Tonight, we are happy to be partnering with the Resolution Project. Thank you so much for this invitation, yes. We're happy to be partnering with them on this conversation. Resolution's mission is to develop socially responsible young leaders and empower them to make a positive impact today. Founded in 2007, Resolution provides a unique pathway to action for aspiring young people committed to changing the world through social entrepreneurship. Through their social venture challenges and Resolution fellowships, they identify, fund, and support undergraduate students, 450 so far, from 77 countries around the world and 21 states across the United States. It's pretty impressive. To start social enterprises solving some of the world's most persistent and challenging problems in areas like food security, sustainable development, human rights, access to clean water, and more. To date, Resolution Fellows have positively impacted the lives of over 1.6 million people globally. That's amazing. The Resolution Project believes that by empowering young people to bring local, scalable solutions to their communities, they can help create a generation of socially responsible leaders who are committed to building a more just and sustainable world. Now, I also want to just take a moment to acknowledge that we have a wonderful, diverse panel. I'm really excited about them. And we just want to let you know that tonight we're just scratching the surface, right? There is no way that we can really talk about this particular topic in depth tonight, right? So this is really an opportunity to just start the conversation, and that's what we're hoping happens tonight. You take it back to your communities, your circles, you continue this conversation, and hopefully you can take some thoughts, some ideas away with you on how you can implement this in your spheres of influence. So just wanted to say that there will be time towards the end of this program to ask questions. So be ready for that and prepared to ask questions and engage in the conversation that way. We also have refreshments in the back, so help yourself. There's wine and beer, I think, and some other snacks. So help yourself with that. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and have our awesome panel to introduce themselves to you. And first, let's kind of do it in a different way. Instead of just stating your name only and your organization, tell us about who you are and what organization you represent. And what was we use this term at Echoing Green, your moment of obligation that led you to this work?
Hi, everyone. Okay, sorry. I'm Kelly Soni, Director of Strategic Partnerships for Camelback Ventures. A little bit about myself. So I have actually been with Camelback full-time only since January. I started as a contractor with them last year, but I am one of the newest Camelback Venture family members. Prior to that, so I'm born and raised in New Orleans, which is where Camelback is based, but I just moved back to New Orleans in 2017. Prior, I was Director of Operations for Carol's Daughter, a beauty care company based here, well, founded and born in Brooklyn, as Lisa would say. So I was with Lisa literally when she was $3 million in sales, had that one storefront in Brooklyn back in 05, 06. I was part of the team that helped her grow to 40 million. We sold it to L'Oreal for over 100 million. So I like to say I'm a living testimony that, dreams do come true in the entrepreneurial world for entrepreneurs of color. But also I have a lot of experience in startup to acquisition and all things in between, because it's a rocky journey. It's certainly achievable, but it's rocky. And as far as my moment of obligation, so like I said, I started with Camelback last year doing contract work. I was working for myself as a consultant in New Orleans, and I was fine with that. Everything was pretty much going copacetic. And I knew that Camelback was special, and I was certainly enjoying my work with Camelback, but it really wasn't until I went to our last summit, the showcase, and I heard the fellows pitch, and I was like, this is where I know I want to be, and I want to make it my job to give each one of these fellows the same fairy tale ending that Carol's Daughter had with theirs. So that's what I knew.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Luna. I'm so used to saying that line, so it's like you really have to think back. So I would say I identify myself as somebody who's an immigrant, somebody who grew up undocumented, somebody who's a DACA recipient, had deferred action for childhood arrivals, and an educator. So that's who I am, and that's the work that I do now within schools. And the reason why the organization was even co-founded. So I came to the States when I was 10 years old from Lima, Peru. Grew up in the Bronx, New York, right off Pelham Road, if anybody's from the Bronx, yeah. And then I also lived out in Westchester County. So I kind of like moved back and forth. My mom cleans houses for a living. My dad cleans offices for a living. And I believe that they're entrepreneurs themselves because they had to come to this country and start a business. And that's what they do now, still to this day. My mom does about 20 houses a month. And so I think about their spirit, but also everything that they sacrificed for me. And a lot of it was rooted on education and having access to greater opportunity and greater resource. Unfortunately, when I came here, my immigration status really impacted every single part of my educational trajectory, literally every single part. And throughout my time as a student, I did not receive the adequate support systems that I should have as an undocumented student. So that's why eventually when I was able to get a work permit, I became a teacher because I never had any teachers like me. And when I became a teacher, the same thing happened. There were no support systems. So I think my moment of obligation has actually been in my entire life. There wasn't an actual moment, but it's been constant experiences from my family, from the students that I served in Los Angeles and in New York City that made me realize that we needed to do more. So that's what we do at M Schools. We support undocumented students and families in the K-12 setting, and because we know that their potential is endless, just like mine, just like my co-founder. And now more than ever, we need to be doing that work.
For me, it was July 5th, 2016. It was a good day. I was about to sign my first full-time offer after college, walking in for midterm reviews. Everything was going well. Being a first-generation college student from a low-income Dominican immigrant family. My parents too, my mom cleaning schools as a custodian, my dad as an Uber driver. there was a lot counting on me to give back to the family. So I was on my way to work in Boston, to my big Shaw consulting job. And that's when I see the news that day that Alton Sterling was shot. Another black man being shot wasn't news to me. I'm from Ferguson, Missouri. I lived 10 minutes away from where Mike Brown was shot. So this was like a little, like, I was in a space of nothingness. I felt empty. So I went into the office where I was the only one crying into work, and I was supposed to think about getting my big shot job. And so I quit because I felt at that moment that I had an obligation to my little brothers who are brown boys growing up in Ferguson, Missouri, and I didn't want them to go into the first job and hide parts of who they are. It is time we start designing a future of work that works for all. We're living in the most multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational workforce ever. So that led me and my co-founder to build Forefront. And we work with top companies to educate them on cultural competency so they can start eliminating implicit biases that might occur through the talent cycle. So that from the moment they're bringing diverse talent in to the moment they're developing, advancing them. And that's really what drives me today. And I'm super happy to be here as a Resolution Project Fellow. It was my first check that allowed me to get this started, and also Camelback, and their later investment that allowed us to propel in this mission to diversify the corporate upper echelon.
And your name, wait, tell us,
Kendi,
tell your
say your
name. Just say your name.
Yeah, tell us who you are.
Andy.
I was just about to introduce you, you know, she's 24 now, 25, you know, proud of you. So I don't know why they added me to the panel. Everyone knows that women are way smarter than men. Maybe they felt like it was going to be too intellectual. So for those of you in the back who need someone to dumb it down a little bit, I think that's why they added me at the end. So I'm Kareem. I grew up in Queens. I was raised by a single parent on government aid. I think there's a lot of similarities in our stories here. My parents were immigrants. They weren't your traditional immigrant who was like pushing education down our throats. They were sort of like, if you want to go to school, you can go. If you don't want to go, no big deal. I had 60 absences when I was in 7th grade. Just started to disconnect a little bit. Wound up going to my local high school, which at the time I thought was amazing. There were 4,400 kids there. My teachers were absent all the time. We would run through the hallways. We threw paper at the subs. We were so horrible. It wasn't until I started to get ready to get out of high school and finally got into college that I started to do research and learn about the inequality in education and realized that, oh shit, you know, we were being robbed of our education when our teachers weren't being there. Like, that wasn't supposed to happen. We weren't supposed to have different subs every single week. We weren't supposed to be running through the hallways. And someone should have been complaining or saying something to the school system because that sort of existed. My older brother and I graduated high school the same year. He later dropped out of a 2-year college. So much of what we went through was just normal. And I started to learn about the inequality. I started to learn about the thousands of reasons or millions of reasons why we have achievement gaps in our system. But I was even more frustrated by the fact that so many kids growing up just like me were being written off every single year. So I was a freshman, I was working hard, I was at Baruch my freshman year in New York City, and I read a stat that said that 11% of first-generation college students graduated from college over 6 years. Not 4, over 6. So I don't even know what the 4-year graduation rate was, but if they were low income, they were also less likely to graduate, and I was like, this isn't cool, I don't want to be another statistic. I was super naive at the time because either way you're going to be a statistic, right? You're either going to be in the 11% that graduates, or you're going to be in the 89%. Back to my, the lack of smartness at the time. But I was like, man, I don't want to be a statistic. I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to prove that kids growing up from the neighborhood that I came out of could achieve, could do everything, like break barriers, set records, whatever it had to be to prove that we can do that. And I was lucky enough to have a series of nonprofits and mentors who kind of pushed me, who supported me, who gave me the opportunity to be able to do that. And when I was 18, I started a nonprofit organization originally called Practice Makes Perfect as a way to pay it forward and give back. We focused on summer because the research said that summer was 2/3 of the achievement gap. Right, and if we could end the summer slide, then we could at least push kids forward, and hopefully if they're at close to proficiency by the time they get to high school, and then through high school, they can go to a great college. And we all know when you go to a great elementary school, you wind up at a better middle school. You go to a better middle school, you wind up at a better high school. You go to a really good high school, you wind up at a better college, and a better college leads to better life outcomes. Despite the debate out there about college being worth the price and whatnot, it's still our society's biggest lever to changing socioeconomic mobility. And so there is no other lever yet, at least not in the United States, that can do that. And so when people say, don't go to school or don't go to college, I always ask them what class they're from, because I think it varies. And mobility should work both ways. You should be able to go up and slide down, but we live in a country where you go up and you rarely slide down, so it's not the same. I got to a point my senior year of college, because this was sort of a side thing. When you grow up poor, you want to be rich. Right, and I had mentors now and friends who were like, Kareem, you're smart, you're hardworking. I transferred to Cornell at this point. I was getting ready to finish with a 3.7 GPA. If you want to make money, you go work on Wall Street. And so I did my internships at Goldman Sachs and at BlackRock in investment banking, and then in the fixed income portfolio management group. Got an offer for $70,000 a year coming out of school, and I turned it down. And I turned it down because I looked at the landscape of everyone who was trying to change education or reform the system, and I realized that they were all people that I looked up to and admired, right? Like Wendy Kopp, Arnie Duncan, Diane Ravitch, Michelle Rhee, even Jeffrey Canada, right, who was awesome. But they all had never gone through these inner city schools. Even Jeffrey Canada talks about how his saving grace in his life was being able to go to Long Island for high school. And so I was like, you have all of these incredible people who are trying to change the system, who have these elite educations with no firsthand perspective of the problem that they're dealing with. And so that was my moment of truth. Here I was, I had gone through these inner city public schools. I had come from the community that I was trying to support. I genuinely believe that the poor are the most equipped to help themselves because they understand the problems that they're dealing with, and I had been blessed with this elite education. So if nothing else, I could at least articulate the systemic issues that I saw in our public school system because I had this inside perspective instead of this outside looking in perspective to the work. I turned down my offers, and we've been scaling and growing. We now partner with schools across New York City. We run programs before, during, and after school hours to really help students reach proficiency in math and ELA. And we have an interventionist in the room, so shine to her.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. A lot of you talked about your moment of obligation being connected to some type of inequality, problem that you saw, or some deeply personal, something that was deeply personally rooted in a personal experience. And just wondering, when you got started, right? Because a lot of times we're really passionate. We're about to go in and do this thing, but then we encounter barriers, right? And so when you were just getting started, can anyone on the panel talk to us about what barriers you may have encountered and how did you navigate those challenges?
I can start. As Kareem said, I am 24, and so we made the transition. It was during our senior year of college. So here's two 22-year-olds, people of color, trying to sell a service to HR leaders. Again, we're selling into big companies, training with folks that have 20+ year experience. So we often found ourselves in rooms where people are probably thinking inside their heads, what are they doing here? What expertise do they have? And we had to face that, and it took a lot of kind of inner confidence building, but the reality to really get through it, it was folks like Kareem, that reminded, actually, Kareem did this. He gave up $70,000 job, so we did too. He's doing it, and it showed the importance of role models like Kareem, because we literally would get on the phone with him and ask him the questions, what are you doing? What did you do right? What made you keep doing this work? And that made all the difference, having folks like him in our network. And so that's why when we talk about representation, visibility, and the stories we tell, that's why it's so important that we find ways to promote more entrepreneurs of color and the work they're doing, because they are out there. There are success stories out there, like you were saying, Kelly, but how do we give them the platform, the resources, the funding, and the capital? Because there are many 20, 18-year-olds like us out there just waiting for someone to follow. They have the skills, they have the talent, but they don't know who else did it. And so that's what really got us through it to today, to push through those hard moments where people said, do you even belong here?
And I think very similarly to Yulkendi, I mean, I think we're a pretty young org, y'all. So when I was invited, I was like, sure. But Camelback was our first real big supporter. And we were a part of that last year. So we have launched last year, and we've been able to train about 1,000 educators with a 2-person staff. Which is crazy to me. But I think a barrier that we saw and we could continue to experience is around just like finances and funding. I want to be really real and honest. Like, I don't have any generational wealth to rely on. I don't have any kind of family member that I could say, hey, can you support me with X, Y, and Z? That's not a thing. This is it, right? So for us, when we were thinking through our plan for finances and all of these components, and I was just talking to Kelly about this, that brought a lot of anxiety for me. Not only because I've had my work permit since 2014. So like, I have not built the type of credit that other citizens in this country have been able to do when you're undocumented, because you don't have a social, you're not able to work, right? All these things. So all these like kind of things that come up with finances and stability give me a lot of anxiety. And I actually worked through that with my Camelback coach. And then also I connected with someone who was in a similar position as me, and connected with her about, she was also an immigrant, also a young woman of color. Her name is Milagros. She started Rise Colorado. And so we connected, and she's really been like my mentor and my guide, and just having conversations on how she managed that space. So I think reaching out to people who you feel comfortable with and who will also elevate you and empower you. Isa Rae said this really, like this statement that has stayed with me a lot. It's like, network, laterally with the person next to you, with people that relate to you, not just always upward. While that's great, a lot of the people that I have found the most impact have been the people right next to me in the same equal spaces as me.
Yeah, and so Vanessa, you kind of led us into this part of our question, and it's how important is access, right? Like for people who are first generation, people who are coming from immigrant families, who don't have resources that some of their counterparts may have when it comes to getting started with ventures and their enterprises, right? It's one thing to want to do something nobly and be successful at it, but it's another thing to really have the support to do it, right? There are some people who can walk away from $70,000 fresh out of college and not even have to think about it, right? But other people like yourself, it's a sacrifice. So can you talk to us about how important is access? And then like and part of that question is, how has access or the lack thereof impacted your work?
I feel like I'm gonna be long on this one. So access, the word access or the concept of access is something I put I'm very thoughtful about what that means for a few reasons. One, when it just comes to equity as a whole in this country, there's never been a time historically where people of color have gotten access and that made everything equal. There's always, the starting point is still lesser than the masses. So I always tell, and also I should say this, I also do a lot of work for the Campaign for Equity of New Orleans. So I talk about equity all day, every day. So I always want to be very mindful of that when we talk about access. And in that, there's so many different points of access that we have to be super, super conscious of. And I'll give you an example. And generally, funding is one of probably the biggest points of contention. A friend of mine has a venture. It's a tech venture. I definitely think it has a lot of potential. He was engaging with a white VC for a big check. And they're like, well, we need to see that you can raise some money on your, so he got the meeting. Now, some people would say that was the access, because everybody can't even get the meeting. So that's already one point of contention, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs of color aren't even getting the meeting. So that's right there, that's something that has to be fixed. That's something that's disjointed in the pipeline. So he got the meeting, he got the access. So they're like, well, we need to see that you can raise your own money. You need to go raise X amount of money. He goes out and raises $250,000. All right, so that's some access, right? He goes back to the VC. Well, we don't know anybody on this list because it was mostly black philanthropists. We don't know anyone on this list because they also are thinking about their relationships with these people. And they're just like, we need you to go to raise more money, but they need to be noticeable names. All right, so there's a lot, that's a loaded, because he's saying it like it's just so easy for any of us to go out and raise $250,000, that's one, right? I did what you asked, and you're still creating a barrier for me. So again, I'm giving that as an example, certainly not to scare anyone, but just how thoughtful we have to be when it comes to this word access. I am a huge, I think one of the things I love about Camelback, and it's something that we want to do more, is drive this narrative about reinvesting in ourselves as our own. And I always draw off the story of Barry Gordy. He couldn't keep a job, but his family had this kind of like family fund, and he actually borrowed $800. And he had to ask a few times. His mom told him no, like 2 or 3, like he really had to pitch this Motown idea. But finally she gave him the $800. He went on and founded Motown, and I'm more than sure he paid that $800 back. But if I'm not mistaken, the Gordy family still has that in practice, that once you enter the working world, you have to contribute to this family fund. So that's kind of how I see Camelback, and we give seed funding as well because we want to be the family and friends round that we know entrepreneurs of color don't have. But in terms of access, I really think it's going to take people like us in the room to recreate our own access and invest in our own selves.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's about being a gatekeeper, right? And being able to elevate some of the things that you're talking about, because you're right, there are different levels of access depending on where you're at in your business and your model, particularly for people who are just getting started, right? Early stage is hard because people want proof of concept, and it's just like, okay, yeah, I have this brilliant idea, but in order to give you proof of concept, I need support, right? So it's kind of like this double-edged sword, and it's really challenging.
I will add, though, that sometimes they're trying to indirectly tell you that they're not interested because they don't like you, or for whatever reason, they're just not interested in you. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a question of like, you get that meeting, and that first impression, whether or not they, like whatever, has nothing to do with your idea, has nothing to do with your business. There's something from your aura, and it is race, right? Sometimes it is race, sometimes it's class. Something from your aura just doesn't rub them the right way. They don't feel that connection, and they're going to continue to give you barriers. And when you go and get that recognized VC, you're gonna go and walk into that room again, and they're gonna give you another reason for why they're not gonna give you their money. So.
No, I hear you. I will say though that, and he eventually, I should say, he eventually got some funding. But I think most VCs, they may take one meeting, but they're not going to continually they're not going to waste their time. That's not going to happen if there's not some. Now, if you can't close the deal, that's probably where the systematic racism comes into play. But I don't think any VC will continuously take meetings with anyone if there wasn't something there. Yeah. That's what I would say.
Yeah. So I want to move on to the next question, and anyone can answer this. This may be a obvious answer to this question, but what role does diversity, equity, and inclusion play in creating a more unique and innovative ecosystem of social entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of talk around what's the return on investment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are the benefits? What are the outcomes? And first we have to acknowledge and visioning the people here in the room are believers. Some of us live this directly. That what that question is really asking again, it's putting a cost to a human. And that sounds very familiar, and that's very dangerous. So I think that the whole finding the ROI to diversity, it's an excuse. There's often when I go to VCs, I just look at data and the metrics. The fact that you're saying that is ignoring a system, that you quite well don't understand the system that has been created. A system that was made not to support people like us in this panel. For whatever reason it is, I don't like you because you don't remind me of where I come from, my hobbies, what I like to do on the weekends. You do very different. Whatever it is, the reason they don't like you, that's all been over the years of bias after bias integrated into a system that has been very purposeful. And that's why women of color are not getting funded. Latinx folks are not getting funded. Black folks are not getting funded. That's very, very intentional. So I just want to acknowledge that sometimes that whole talk about the power, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's itself an excuse to perpetuate the same system. Oh, we first got to validate that a reason of why we got to do this. But having said all that, obviously, we all know that having diverse thoughts and ideas, diverse people is what leads to innovation. Just think of what happened with the PepsiCo ad, H&M, and all those bad marketing campaigns going wrong. It's because the diverse group of people weren't in the room. Folks with diverse experience are able to catch each other gaps. That's why we work better in teams in general. So it's common sense. And in a moment in society where there's a lot of gaps to fix, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to economic inequality, this is the time to really leverage entrepreneurial action to really change a lot of, tackle those opportunities and make the world more equitable, because that's going to lead to better results for everyone. So that's why it's important for organizations like Camelback, Resolution Project, and others to really close the gap, because if not, we're really in trouble as a society. So to me, I just want to bring up that question that when you say I look at data or metrics, that's a really problematic statement. I think there's more people that need to be educated around the current entrepreneurship ecosystem that has been formed and who is it really for right now.
Did anyone else want to?
I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is the word used to be just diversity.
Right.
And I think it was in the last 5 to 10 years that it's evolved to be about equity and inclusion, because you can have a group of women at a table, a group of people of color at a table, and if they're not included or feel like they can contribute, God knows there may have been someone in that room of color when the H&M ad was being posted or the PepsiCo ad was being posted, and they saw it, but they just didn't feel included enough to be able to say something. And so, yeah, we can talk about diversity, we can create diverse spaces, but if there isn't a sense of inclusion where people feel like it is also okay for them to contribute and their thoughts and ideas are welcome, it won't matter. The diversity doesn't matter.
Yeah. So we are seeing a lot of innovation happening now, and a lot of shifts going on in these spaces, particularly around people of color, women, and social entrepreneurship and innovation. More doors are opening. There could be so much more work that could be happening. Let's be clear about that. But I'm curious if you, in your particular space, have seen any trends over the course of you doing your work, and also where would you like to see advancement happening where you're not really seeing that?
I think I can speak on, and I know we've been talking a lot about funding and kind of seeking funding, but I think that's just on top of our minds, or at least my mind, constantly as a startup. But I think one, theme that I constantly see when we're having conversations with folks is when they are funding organizations, in particular startups, they're looking at one particular bucket, right? So they're looking at education, immigration, social justice. And when you're doing work that's intertwined, our work is immigration and education. So if I go to an education space, they want the metrics. They want how many percentage of them are going to pass the state test. And I'm telling them, I can't count the amount of undocumented students that we're serving because it's illegal, right? So like, that's where I'm working from, right? And then also seeing that our ultimate goal is not, like, we would hope that the work that we're doing is to elevate student experiences, their power, and their access to resources. But it's not so that they can pass a standardized test. That's not the work that we're doing. There's other organizations that are doing that, and that's wonderful, but that's not our work, right? So I think what I would love to see is shifting it more towards an interconnection. When we talk a lot about intersectionality, like our students, especially in the education space, don't just come in and want to take a test. From my experience working as a teacher, that was not what I saw at all, ever. And their immigration status doesn't leave them, their identity doesn't leave them when they come into the classroom. So why have we not thought about intersectional ways to invest in organizations and not just in buckets? So that's what I would like to see moving forward.
I have a few things I would like to see. But in terms of trends, I mean, I think everyone is waving the equity flag. I think everybody's saying, you know, social impact investing, which is great. And I think to a certain extent that is starting to like really evolve. I think though leaders still have to be led. And I don't know if everyone really knows how to design a more equitable practice, or whatever the mission is that they're saying that they're trying to get closer to. But I think it is trendy, especially with millennials, to really believe in something, and I think that's great. By the way, I'm certainly, that's not coming from a sarcastic place. I think that's great. I think the work that goes along with that isn't always there, and sometimes it's just because, again, the execution piece of it is really the part that people get stuck on. But trends I would like to see more of is companies. So one of the things, I guess I would say the first trend is particularly in the private sector, is seeing them more kind of live their values. So I hesitate to say this while I'm filming, but like a company like Nike, right? You have the biggest athletes in the world. You know, you just did this huge campaign around Colin Kaepernick, but how diverse really is your staff? Or how much are you really reinvesting in the community, even outside of sports? Because, and I'm trying to talk a little vague because I'm actually engaging Nike with something right now, but even like, why wouldn't you hire your Kendi to figure out how to retain more people of color in your organization? To me, that's going to be more impactful than you just finding some after-school sports program. I mean, I'm not saying it. Yeah, I'll stick to that statement. To me, that's more important, or if not equally as important as finding the next sports organization to donate some money to. So I think I would like to see more of a deeper dive and how they're really truly living out the values that they kind of proclaim.
I think people are talking a lot more about purpose today. I think the traditional nonprofit model is people are stopping their donations from the traditional nonprofits, and I think Bill Gates led a whole wave of this. The guilt factor of what happens when I die and I can't fund the organization anymore, will it continue to exist? And so there's this whole push even in the nonprofit space for these like earned income models where there's at least some revenue coming in behind what they're doing. I think foundations are starting to like dip their toes in the water of engaging with organizations that might not be traditionally nonprofits. There's this whole wave now of social enterprise, and people are talking about socially conscious organizations. I think the conversations around purpose and profit are getting larger, right? It's not enough to solve the social problem anymore. You also have to solve a pain point. And if you can marry those two things, you're building a sustainable business that people can get behind and still feel good while they're a part of it. So I think on the trend side, like those things are already starting to happen. I don't know for trends I'd like to see. I mean, I feel like the money is moving in that direction already. I think there's a lot of talk about equity, but the numbers haven't supported it yet. So we're starting the conversations, like you said earlier, but I think over time, with some more success stories and successful examples, I think people who are on the fence or who are afraid of it are going to start to do it. And even amongst like the circles of like white friends I'm in, conversations about white privilege are coming up a lot more. It's not just about being woke anymore, it's what's the guilt factor that I feel having been born as like a white male in this society and having the privilege that I've had now. It's not across the board, it's not everyone, but those are conversations that didn't even exist a decade ago. And now people are starting to, at least in New York, you know, because that's a whole nother, like, those things are happening, but can we see those things start to take form across the US?
Awesome, thank you. So I'm gonna ask some individual questions now just so that we can get a better scope of your work and how you see it moving forward. We'll ask one more collective question and then we would love to open it up to the audience for any questions that you may have. So I will start with Vanessa. So you've made education your life's work. And you wrote your master, I did a little research, and you wrote your master thesis on the fear of deportation, the effects of the threat of deportation in Mexican youth's views of their community. Given that you work directly with students and parents who are impacted by the challenges of immigration, how does the work of M Schools reduce barriers for both educators and families?
Before I even tackle that question, I think it's important to know, like myself and my co-founder both have, I mean, together years of being, like 20 plus years of being undocumented in this country. And I think we continue to ask ourselves, you know, what would it have been like if the education system was welcoming, was supporting, and gave us resources when we needed it? And then we also ask ourselves, what would it have been like for the dreams of our parents who gave up everything for us to actually be realized through this education, right? So that's the reason why I even do the work or even started the work in education, because it did propel me forward, but it was extremely challenging. And it should not be this challenging. It just shouldn't. It should not be this challenging for me to be sitting here. It shouldn't. So when we think about M Schools and the work that we're doing, and for my own time in the classroom and being a teacher, which is the greatest job I will ever have, I will say that. Teaching was the greatest thing I have ever done in my entire life. So I taught in Los Angeles and in New York City, and you see the really large gaps around immigration and the knowledge that's missing. So we work with educators closely with them because we believe that they are the first people often that parents and students go to in search for resources and answers and support. We work closely with them to build their competency around immigration, not only policy, but also practices. What are the safe and welcoming spaces that you can build in your classroom? Because I have met educators in New York and in Texas who want to support their students and families regardless of their immigration status, where immigration is more about humanity rather than these policies that we hear constantly. So we work closely with educators to equip them with those tools that I wish I would have had as a teacher and that I wish my teachers would have had for me as a student. When it comes down to students and parents, we do a lot of work around building understanding around resources. So what are the resources that are available to you as an undocumented parent or as an undocumented student? Not only for college access, because college access is one component that we know is really, really important to understand, especially as an undocumented student and a family member, but also just around the daily life and experience of what it could be like for you to possibly in the future go to college, right? Because when you're undocumented, that conversation is often not even a piece of what you're thinking about, or if it is, you question every single type of move that you're doing because you're unsure if a university could even be a reality. So we have a lot of conversations around that and around knowing their rights. I don't know if you all have seen a video that recently came out But there was a driver who was driving two undocumented people to court, and he was stopped over by immigration custom enforcement, and he knew his rights. He knew what an actual warrant from ICE looked like, and he stopped them from getting detained. That is massive. So we work closely with families in schools to have conversations around their rights and empower them. Because being an immigrant in this country is extremely challenging, but it is beautiful. It builds resilience and it builds power, and no one talks about that. My strength comes from my experience, and that's the piece that we work on with families, is building their power. Because honestly, and I keep saying this, we're here to stay. Like, this is my country. I'm not going anywhere, and none of us are going anywhere. So with that being said, we need to empower them, and that brings me a lot of hope. So those are the things we're seeking to change.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Kareem, I'm going to move to you. In your TED Talk, you said something really powerful. You mentioned that your lived experience created a level of empathy that other prominent leaders in education reform didn't have. Why is lived experience important to this work?
I mean, the work itself is sensitive for so many people, but also could be transformative. I talk a lot about like why I still love what I do, and it's the ability to change and like help people realize their potential. I just think back to a moment where it was my second year out of school. I've been doing this work now, and I'm sitting at a conference. The guy gets up there and he starts speaking. He'd been in the system for maybe 50 years. Running all sorts of schools as a principal before, and now as like a school like leader or figurehead. And to the audience of people, he says, guys, guess what? We're dropping the word or the term ESL. And instead of ESL stands for English as a second language. We're moving to ENL, English as a new language, because for some kids, English is their third or fourth language. And I sat there and I was like, holy shit. It took you guys 40 years to figure that out. And I think that is, again, like, I was born in the US, I speak one language, people are coming from somewhere else, they speak one language other than English that they have to learn, and so we call it ESL. And yeah, the way you're gonna approach someone who's learning a second language is very different than how you approach the first person. And in the beginning of the journey, you feel like, this is hard, this is difficult, it's wall after wall, it's setback after setback, and the little bit of progress you make some days is then erased a couple of days later. And I got to a point where, before that moment, I was just like, man, this is structural oppression. Like, people are out there who believe that people coming from other countries or first generation or of a certain color, like, just don't deserve to succeed. And they're putting all of these systems and barricades out there to like keep people down. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't that, right? It wasn't someone like going out there and trying to intentionally oppress, because oppression takes effort, right? It was just apathy. It was just that this problem never affected me. It wasn't something that I dealt with. It wasn't something I could relate to. And so because it doesn't cross my mind every single day, it's not something that I care about fixing. And I talk about that with even like us, right? Like, we're sitting here, we have our very exclusive issues. There are more problems than the problems that we're solving, right? We're not even like touching the surface. There's homelessness, there's poverty, there's like child welfare. We don't wake up and start thinking about those problems because we're so enthralled in the problem that we're trying to fix. And that's absolutely okay as long as you're fixing a problem. It's our job then to motivate and inspire other people to care about the work that we're doing. And if we can get people to care, you'll start to see real change.
Thank you. Yokendi, I'll go to you next. Your work leverages the power of data, empathy, and design thinking to help organizations successfully engage and retain their millennials of color. Can you share with us why this work is so important, and what does true diversity, equity, and inclusion look like in the workforce, particularly in corporate America?
Yeah, I think we love using this Ursula Burns quote to explain our work. So Ursula is the first female Black CEO in the Fortune 500. She was the CEO of Xerox. And she speaks about, she was asked in a Fortune article, what's missing in the workplace? And she said, sponsorship. So earlier we talked a little bit about mentorship. And that's cool and all. There's just been a lot of mentorship programs out there. But now that's also, I talk about how things sometimes are used to perpetuate the system. The whole idea of, let's build another mentorship program for youth of color because they need the skills. They need to get better. But that's also a distraction. What's happening, there's millennials of color are and will be the majority of the workforce by 2025. And when you look by 2060, women of color will be the majority of the workforce as regards to gender. So we are a powerful majority. We're bringing a lot of skills, a lot of change. So it's not about necessarily people like us becoming better. That has been the distracting point from what we actually need with the sponsorship. We need advocates, champion, giving us new projects, promoting us, actually putting us in the spaces of access. And what's tricky about access and sponsorship is that it happens right in front of our faces, and that's what makes it so painful. These type of access happens at the bar, at the golf course, right? It seems behind the scenes, but it's really not. But you have to be invited to the spaces to get those type of opportunities, to get to the point where, hey, I like you. I'm gonna give you that job, even though I have no idea what your skills are. So at Forefront, we're really trying to normalize sponsorship and for people that haven't normally gotten access to it. And sponsorship, we talk a lot about unconscious bias training, all the companies are doing it. That's unconscious bias training hasn't eliminated bias or moved the needle whatsoever within organizations. Research is actually telling us that sponsorship, it's what's gonna move the needle. So those who have sponsors, if Vanessa has a sponsor and at this big company, say Nike, she's more willing to perceive less bias in the workplace. That means she's gonna walk into Nike thinking, actually, these people believe me. These people will promote me. They accept who I am as a person, as an immigrant, who my family is. And so you're more willing to feel more engaged and welcome and like you belong. So having a sponsor is 90% eliminates bias by 90%. So that's the most powerful intervention in the workplace, but we don't talk about that because that's not the story we want to tell, right? So for us at Forefront, we're telling that story. We're saying, leaders in corporate America, if you really want to change this, you have to advocate for people, start championing people of color, and really promoting them into positions of power. Right now, even though the US is 30% Black and Latino, there's still under 3% of people of color in senior leadership. That's a big gap, and that's because there's not a lot of sponsorship. We're still promoting the same type of people. So at Forefront, we're creating those spaces where we're bringing senior leaders and millennials of color together to meet each other, because they don't even get to meet, because again, they don't get to go to the bar, happy hour. So we create those spaces where they talk about race, culture, identity, where they say, hey, I have curly hair and it actually takes me an extra 2 hours to get ready. And that's something to think about, but when I get here, there's, that's not, I don't feel comfortable because all the leaders don't have curly hair. So to have those kind of conversations that you don't get to have actually are gonna move the needle more than any community program, more than any mentorship program, and that's a real system change that needs to happen, and that's the work we're doing.
Awesome, thank you. So for the sake of time, I have one last question for Kelly, and then we're gonna open it up to the audience for questions. You have an extensive background in entrepreneurship and growing startups. In your current role, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you serve as a gatekeeper essentially to pipelines of both emerging social entrepreneurs and access to resources to help those leaders to scale up. What recommendations do you have for people who are interested in similar careers?
So my primary role at Camelback is fundraising, coalition building, and resource pipelining. So having said that, the first thing I would tell anybody who was applying for a role like mine is, one, you need to get very proximate with the idea of racism. You need to really understand, because this racism undergirds all of this, from the solutions to the entrepreneurs. It's the common thread. So if you are not comfortable, or if you're not comfortable getting proximate with racism, you shouldn't be having these conversations, because it really takes, and I like to tell people all the time, like, we're all adults, right? You pretty much can do whatever you want to do. It's about what you have the courage to do. So it takes a high level of courage to really be in this type of role. You know, it to the point that, like, if I'm sitting in front of, you know, a rich white person or whatever, and they're like, well, what do entrepreneurs need? You know, and I like to be thoughtful of that, because it's nothing pathologically different in us. And, you know, you have to be comfortable saying we need the same thing white men need. Like, you have to you have to be very comfortable with that. The other thing is, I can't raise money from my desk. It's a grind. You know, I'm constantly out and talking, and, you know, I got to know everyone's birthday and the kid's birthday, and, you know, I mean, that's just kind of comes along with it as well. So don't do it if you really are passionate about it, because it is very time consuming. And the third thing I would just say is, with any job, I would just say make sure that you find a boss that really wants to invest in you. You know, you're not just looking for a job. Like, that has to be a mutual relationship. And I'm just very blessed to have Aaron, who's the founder of Carol's daughter, Camelback, who understands that all of our destinies are tied. And you have to accept that. Like, I can't win if they don't win, and vice versa. So it's important that there's a mutual understanding of the investment that we're all making in each other.
Awesome. This conversation has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking time to answer these questions, to share more about your work and what you're passionate about. I know that there are probably burning questions in the audience, so I would love to open up the floor to anyone who has a question for our panelists this evening. I'm not sure how the microphone situations are working for this. Okay. Should they? I thought, there was a hand over here. Okay, so after.
Hi, thank you so much for such invaluable feedback. As a person of color and an immigrant in this country, everything resonated very much so. I was snapping my fingers in my head the whole time. My name is Atia. I currently work at what's now called Refinitiv, formerly Thomson Reuters Financial and Risk, and I'm working on an ESG campaign. On the side, I'm working on a financial literacy platform. Now, it's not something I have 100% full experience in, but it's something I'm really passionate about. So, given the fact that, you know, when you started, potentially you might not have had all that experience that you needed to do well at your job or your current venture, how do you tackle that overwhelming sense of needing to know everything to do well from the beginning?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, because again, they're looking at us like, where did you build this framework curriculum? We do training, and you know, the real answer is we got to action. We experimented a lot. I think we're still living in a society where we think traditional book learning is real knowledge, but it's not. Clearly, we have the same problems that we had for a while now. So clearly, book learning, traditional experts are not solving this. It really takes a lot of experimenting, almost the eyes of an entrepreneur, because even if you're within your job, you always have to look within the context. How can I change this? How can I innovate this and adapt this? So the best way you can get to action is, you know, do a quick pilot, go out there, because that's the actual proof that what you're building works. No book, no article, no research is gonna tell you that. The real people that you're trying to help or you're trying to serve are gonna tell you that. So talk to them and build pilots around that, and that's what I did. for a few years before even going to full-time, because I actually did this in college before we did this full-time, just small pilots, did crowdfunding, and went out there and asked people, are you really benefiting for this? And the data was saying they were. So that's really what you should be paying attention to, not the other voices out there.
I'd also add just conviction, right? At the end of the day, so much of what we do and what we've done is because we authentically believe that we are supposed to be doing the work that we're doing in this moment. Like, we are uniquely positioned, given the time, given our resources, given everything else, to be the person who's supposed to solve this problem. And that comes through some deep introspection, like asking yourself questions like, why is this important? Why does this matter to me? Why am I the right person to be doing this? Why is this important right now? Why is this important to me right now? Why am I the right person to be doing this right now? And when you have answers to those questions, there's no right answer, but when you have answers to those questions that you believe in, that you can authentically get behind, you're gonna have a level of conviction in the work that you're doing that's gonna allow you to have the confidence and everything else that you need to be successful in doing your work. So doing that introspection and that reflection to really get to a point where you believe this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Hi, I want to first thank everyone on the panel for doing an incredible job today and giving us some really actionable feedback. I think that's really important. My name is Maya Brooks. I am a product manager at a company called I Fund Women. I'm also the founder and CEO of my own company called Coffee and Coded, where we empower women to try tech through our courses in coding, design, and entrepreneurship. I also teach at GA. But my question really kind of revolves around the trend of lots of big Fortune 500 companies hiring a diversity and inclusion lead, and like all of a sudden the diversity problem's fixed, right? Like, we hired this person and like that's all we have to do. And sometimes I hear from friends of mine or people I know, friends of friends, who are in those positions that once they get the position, they don't feel empowered necessarily to actually make change within the organization. It's kind of like they just are a nice figurehead for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to know how you think about what they can do from that position and what organizations can do better to empower those diversity executives.
All right, that's a great question. I'm gonna take a stab at it. So I know exactly, I mean, at Carol's Daughter, we didn't necessarily have a diversity person, but L'Oreal, absolutely did. And the reality is, to Kendi's point earlier, when things like Gucci happen and H&M, it's not because of a lack of diversity executive, it's because someone wasn't in the design, and maybe they were, but they just may not have felt empowered. So I think it could go a few different ways, and I don't necessarily think I have the best solution. You may have a better one, but I think first of all, before even accepting the job, the scope of work needs to be crystal clear as to, and within that person needs to have very specific asks or demands, not even asks, as to their role and and find those points of empowerment. So I think that's one way. I don't think that I think that person needs to figure out a way to get as close to the decision-making power and the money as possible. And I know I'm kind of speaking from a 50,000-foot view, and I'm sure that's a lot easier said than done. But again, these are things that I would be asking going into the job before even taking the job. And we need to, and just to hold the company accountable, we need to put some type of evaluation together ahead of time as well. That way, now the company is on the hook for it as well. It needs to be tied into my work as well, and it needs to be as cross-sector as possible, because I think part of the issue is these things happen in silos. Like here's the diversity and you know, like at Carol's daughter at L'Oreal, we'll do Essence and that, you know, what have you. And there's no, again, there's no, it's not transcending, so to speak, right? So I would say that's something. And then you had a second part of the question. I just want to make sure I'm.
Organizations doing better and the diversity leaders themselves trying to make that happen.
Right, so that's from someone who's a diversity officer, right? I think in terms of organizations as a whole doing better, I think I'm not, oh, by the way, I'm not just promoting Ukindi just because, but I do think it takes the Ukindis of the world to implode the company. I think that, again, leaders have to be led. For instance, when I first started Camelback, I literally made a Hot 100 list. I Googled all these companies who were waving the equity flag. When I go to either their executive board or their board, it's almost always homogenous. So how? Like, how are you saying this but doing another, right? And I think, I do think it takes a lot of leaning in. I think it takes a lot of pressure. I think these things have to be elevated. People have to be courageous enough to call it out. I think it has to be demanded within millennials and junior staff members. I think pressure points have to come from everywhere to really make these companies change and really live the values that they're saying.
Oh, no, we can talk offline.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Hi again. I just want to thank everyone again for an amazing panel. So my name is Cassandra McDonald. I'm actually a student here at GA. I'm taking the UX class and I actually do UX UI as well. So I'm very passionate about women in gaming. I've done a lot of interviews. It's kind of sad, some of the insights that I've gotten back. 100% of women say they've had a negative experience in gaming. A lot of women are underrepresented in gaming. So currently right now I have like prototype stage for an app and platform that I'm designing for like women in gaming to get together. So my question kind of is like, at what point in y'all's journey did you feel like comfortable enough to like actually start putting yourself out there, like asking for funding? Like, did you already have like some type of like perfected curriculum, or like when did you like actually make the decision to like put yourself out there and not feel like this weird imposter syndrome?
So I still feel like that, by the way, many times. So it doesn't go, or at least for me, it hasn't gone away yet. For us, myself and my co-founder worked on this idea of M schools for many years in our head and in the work that we were doing. And we worked full time at Teach for America while also thinking about the curriculum of the work that we were doing. So we didn't actually decide to launch until after our pilot data was concluded. And we had the funding for both of us to go full time. But that was us because we couldn't, I will tell you, this is like the position I was in. I could not get paid. I needed to pay. I mean, we live in New York City. I like didn't have anywhere else to go. I couldn't, so, and my parents couldn't take care of me, as I have mentioned before. So we had to wait that long to do it. I think for us, it was really, really hard to manage doing multiple jobs at once. And once we went to M schools full time, it was incredible to just be doing one multiple job because that's literally what we're doing. But I think it was a combination of having a conversation with ourselves and saying, okay, these are the people that we're seeking out for funding. How can we make sure that we have enough so that we both feel comfortable? So it was a conversation between us two and saying, are you okay with making like $50,000 for the first year, even though it's not the most here in New York City? Like, I'm down, I'm able to make it happen. And that's how we did it. So for us, it was about funding. Our curriculum is still developing. It's directly informed by the people that it impacts, and it will continue to do so for the rest of M schools forever. So we're still developing. I think next year we'll add on more things based on what the community says that they need. So I think you have to ask yourself, what is it? What's the one thing that's you have to have 100%. And for us, it was the financial piece, but for you, it might be something different. So just being really authentic to yourself, because if not, when you go out there and do it, you're not going to be able to be 100% yourself and 100% out there. That's my advice. I'm only one person, so you should definitely.
Hi, thank you. I enjoyed the panel. My name is Javanea. I actually work with Kareem and PMP. And my question was for your execution. When a startup is ready for their execution and, go out and actually going to get the funding, how should they proceed?
What do you mean proceed?
Like, if I'm ready to go get the funding, but, the access isn't there, so how would I proceed in, figuring these things out if I'm just getting started and, I have amazing idea like you guys said, but I don't have, coming to a forum like this, how would I proceed in, gaining that access, if I'm not in a group like Campbell or things like that, so.
And this goes to your question, I think. We're building an app now, and then the first time we presented, we decided, let's just do it at a pitch competition in front of a bunch of folks, and I ended up walking out with $35,000. So when are you ready? Yesterday. Just sign up for anything. I think I do the things when I'm scared, I know I'm doing something right. Honestly, that doesn't happen. You're not gonna walk out with a good outcome, but that's the process of building the conviction that you were talking about. Just doing things like that. I think you've explained it fairly well to us. I think you can get your way to get funding. And same for you. I mentioned earlier, I follow people like Kareem, and I basically see who he was friends with and kind of track what they do. It's a little bit of stalking. So I'm like, what communities was he part of? His friends was part of, and that's the honest answer, because I didn't have access, but I'm lucky enough to at least have a computer. So I would stalk people on Facebook, Twitter, check what they did, and now obviously LinkedIn also made it easier, and I just built this list. And then I would Google, and then after I Google, other things will come out of it, and I just started showing up. And they have a joke about our team. My co-founder is also Dominican, and they're like, you guys are everywhere, and it's that we don't have access, so we have to create it. We show up, we sneak in. If we don't have a ticket, you got to be there. So if you're passionate about an idea, just start tracking the people that goes with what you're saying, lateral networking, that already just like two steps away from you, and check what they did. Ultimately, like Vanessa was saying, it's not that the same thing that worked for them will work for you, but it's just a way to get started, and after that it will open other doors. So we still do that to this day. We just keep showing up and seeing what opportunities are available for us out there.
Always ask for advice or share your ideas with people. Like, a very related question I hear to both of those is, I'm really scared someone's gonna take my idea and run with it. 99.99% of the time, like, either your idea already exists in the current state, or like no one's gonna take exactly what you're doing. And this is why I was talking about conviction and knowing that you're supposed to be the one doing what you're supposed to be doing. And ultimately, whatever you start with isn't gonna be what you end with. Right, this is just the beginning of it. So if someone takes your idea in its current state, like, wish them luck, because odds are it's not gonna work. You need to go out there and test it, like everyone was talking about. You're gonna get feedback, it's gonna get better, but start asking people for advice. Share what you have so far, allow people to add input. When I first got the idea for what I wanted to do, I pitched maybe 200 different people. And when I say pitch, it was informal. It's that question where people would ask me, Kareem, how are you? And 90% of the people don't really care. But I would take that opportunity and say, I'm great, but I have this idea and here's what I'm trying to do. And that was the very beginning of it. And then of those 200 people, 10 people finally came back, or 7 people came back. And then that was a follow-up conversation. And then you start asking people for advice, and then people start saying, well, maybe you should do this, or maybe you should meet this person, or maybe you should meet that person, or I actually really like what you're doing. I want to support it, or I want to put money behind it. And then that's how it starts.
Yeah, so I was just gonna kind of say something similar is try to get people as engaged with your idea as possible. Like, I think the more engagement that there is, the more likely or more receptive they are to give you whatever the ask is. I'm a big believer everybody's a philanthropist, so no money is too big or too small. There was a girl I went to a panel. She had to finish her documentary, and she started something on Instagram. Let me hold $20. It ended up raising like some astronomical amount of money, and I'm not saying that you need to go do that tonight. I'm just making the point.
Could though.
Yeah, for real, you could though. Or put 5 on it or whatever. But like, I'm a huge believer everybody is a philanthropist, and you can empower the people around you to do so. But just I fairly warn you that for every 10 asks, you'll probably only get 9 no's, 1 maybe at best. If you get a yes, you definitely got a home run. And like I said earlier, you can't outside from the stalking that you Kendi was talking about, you really can't raise money at your desk. Like, you need to be out there meeting with people, sharing, and again getting everyone as engaged as possible.
Just wanting to thank the panel, and if for anyone who has been in the room tonight and you got something that was transformative for you, you got something that you can put in your pocket as you move forward in whatever it is that you're aspiring to do, I encourage you to share that, not only with the people that you're sitting next to, but those who you're gonna go home to, your communities, your workplaces, even the panelists. Again, what I really love about entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs are that they always admit that they're continuing to refine their process, and they're always learning and developing. And just the vulnerability that's here on this panel, in addition to people who work in spaces like I do at Echo and Green, who are serving as gatekeepers for these amazing leaders to do the work that they're doing. You've given them a round of applause, but I would encourage you to share whatever inspired you tonight, and then take that back to your own community. So again, thank you so much for this evening. It was an amazing panel, awesome conversation, and we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you so much.